This is the first session of hopefully one per month, and we'll get deeper into some topics in the future. But to start, this is going to be an overall introduction to the AREs, and this can absolutely be a discussion. We don't want to just run through these slides and Darren and I talk for 2 hours. Feel free to chime in if you got any questions, or if you want to drop something in the chat, we can stop and talk about that if we need to. So to get into it, a little bit about ourselves. My name is Brian Olagus. I'm an architect at SHP. I've been here for 8 years now. Went to UK and Miami for my degrees, and co-chair of our early professionals committee with AIA Cincinnati.
Hi, I'm Darian. I started, okay, where do I start? I'm an architect at ResTark, and I'm also a collaborator for Black Spectacles. Was working with Black Spectacles, which is an ARE test prep company. If you've ever seen it, they have like practice exams as well as virtual workshops, and I've been collaborating with them since November of 2019 in a few roles, doing script writing, acting as a group tutoring coach, and then most recently, I hosted their project management workshops biweekly since I think it was from about June of 2020 through November of 2022, this last year. And I've recently just stepped down a little bit so I could dedicate more time to sleeping and doing things like helping the AIA. I had the opportunity to help restart the Early Professionals Committee, which went dormant over COVID, and I'm the current chair. Also, I went to DAP for my undergraduate as well as graduate degrees, and started at ResTark about a year ago. So lovely to meet everyone, and some people I already know.
And if you'd be interested, let us know a little bit about yourselves. If you guys want to let us know where you're at in your journey with the ARE and getting licensed, if you got any comments there. Right. So today is a general overview of everything that we're going to touch on. We're going to hit the high-level topics of what is the NCARB, what are the AREs, and what do you need to be able to take those tests. And then we're going to get into a breakdown of all the different ARE divisions and the format of the exams. We'll go through the different question types that you'll see on the exams and go through a few examples with that. We'll get into the exam software with the demonstration exam that NCARB offers, talk about scheduling and the testing centers and what needs to happen there. And then we'll get into a little bit of what we offer as AIA Cincinnati. We've been working to put together a bit of a resource library and other support that we offer that is outside of what NCARB gives you. So to start with a general overview of what everything is, probably familiar with NCARB, but if you're not, it's the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. It's an overall body that collaborates with all the jurisdictions around the U.S. For licensing boards and creates standard regulations that ensure a term that you'll hear a lot in these tests is health, safety, and welfare of the public. And you'll need those HSW hours to maintain your license going forward as well. The AREs are the architectural registration exams. So this is a group of 6 licensing exams that are meant to prove that you maintain minimum competency to ensure that health, safety, and welfare of the public. And that's a fun little term that I like to throw at you too. It makes you feel real good about it. And then you'll need to complete these AREs to practice as an architect in all U.S. jurisdictions. And then there's some other requirements I will get into depending on where we're at. But we will mainly be focusing on Ohio today for those focused requirements. So for Ohio, you need a NAB accredited professional degree. In most cases, that's a Master's of Architecture degree. I think there's only a few Bachelor's of Architecture degrees in the country anymore. But typically it's a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science is not considered a professional degree, and then you need the master's to move forward with it. The experience portion of that eligibility is that you need to complete the AXP program, which is the Architectural Experience Program through NCARB. You require 3,740 hours for that, and that's across 6 divisions that line up with the different divisions of the AREs. Some jurisdictions have additional requirements, and we'll get into NCARB's licensing requirement tool very quickly on how you can look at what those different requirements might be. And then the exams themselves, they are the 6 exams, depending on if you want to look at a different region. Sometimes there are additional regional exams. To be able to test in Ohio, you actually need to go to Ohio's Board of Architects website, and they communicate with NCARB on this, and we have this linked, but you would go to the application for licensure and actually apply through their board to be able to be approved to test in Ohio. I think there's a small fee with that. I want to say $50, $60. And then in addition to, I mentioned the AXP conditions. If you or anyone you know is still working on AXP or is going to start, if you are still a student in Ohio, you can get a $100 reimbursement for that AXP enrollment. So don't let that one go. It's a simple 1-page form to fill out and just prove that you are still a student, and you can get that reimbursement. So to get back to that, let's open this is the licensing requirements tool with NCARB that I mentioned. So again, we're mostly looking at Ohio here. And so a real quick way to do that is, click on that state and it'll highlight all the requirements that you need for that area. So I know for Ohio that completion of the AXP is required. Completion of the ARE is required. There is technically early eligibility that you can take before you complete your master's degree if you are at the proper program, like DAP at UC offers is it ITAP? No, I'm sorry. What do they call that?
Integrated Path to Licensure, or IPAL?
IPAL. I don't know why I said ITAP. But yes,
close enough.
That's potential for early eligibility to take the ARE, though my understanding is that it's fairly difficult to be able to balance that at the same time as your studies.
Ooh,
in addition
confirm.
Yes.
If anyone is currently in school, the Integrated Path to Licensure is awesome because it gives you availability to test. And at least at the University of Cincinnati, it also gave you the opportunity to sign up for ARE prep classes that DAP had as a part of their curriculum. You couldn't sign up for those classes unless you were part of the Integrated Path to Licensure program. So there were some benefits, but very few people actually tested during school just because of the time commitment. Now let's turn it back over to you, Brian.
Yeah. In addition to selecting a specific state on this, you can also look at a specific requirement. One popular one to look at is a professional degree from a NAB accredited program. So you'll actually see that there's a number of states on here that you don't technically need that NAB accredited degree to qualify for licensure there. So there's other pathways that you can do in different jurisdictions, and just because you might live in Ohio or work in Ohio does not mean that you need to get licensed in Ohio. You can really get licensed in any jurisdiction in the country. When you would set up your NCARB account, you just name your target jurisdictions, and that's how they'll be able to line up what is required before they send everything off to that local board. So there's different routes there. You can take a look through this and get a little bit more information. It also gives information about once you have your license, what you need for reciprocal registration if you are trying to get licensed in multiple jurisdictions, or if you need to have that renewed, or just the requirements in that state. This helps talking about firms, how certain firms are required to have a specific number of architects in ownership of that firm to be able to call themselves an architectural firm in that jurisdiction. And so different states carry different requirements there. All right, back to what we had here. Next, we'll look at that NCARB record that I started to mention. So this is once you start your AXP experience hours, start looking at taking the exams. This record is something that you'll need to start and to keep track of everything through those experience hours, to schedule the exams, keep track of your education records and your registrations and everything going forward. So if you are working professionally or even as a co-op, you should be reporting those hours for that AXP program. While we said Ohio requires, I think, 3,740 hours, there are some states that still require more. So just because you might hit that target in your jurisdiction, don't stop reporting. I think I reported up to like 6,000 hours or something, because the old requirement was somewhere around 5,400, I believe. And then again, that AIA Ohio offers that one-time reimbursement if you are still a student. You'll need to submit transcripts from your education to NCARB to get that registered, and they'll audit that as well. And then this is your portal to see all your information for the ARE, from the rolling clock that we'll talk about. You'll use this to schedule your exams and purchase seats for those exams. And then you'll be able to see your pass-fail reports for the exams that you've taken, and to help you plan for your next steps. Through this portal, you'll also be able to access 6 free practice exams. That is 1 per division. And those are full-blown practice exams that you can take with a timed clock, or you can take it a little bit more casually without the clock, depending on the experience that you're looking for while you're studying. To start the record, it's at $100 that you can get reimbursed for, and then it's $85 annually to maintain the record while you're unlicensed. Prices bump up a little bit once you get licensed.
And then just a quick note, if you let your NCARB record lapse for a year, it's not like you pay $85 to restart it and then you just didn't pay the $85 for that year that you lapsed. They make you pay $85 twice. So there is no benefit to letting your record lapse if you plan on using it to pursue your licensure. Go ahead and just pay it at a yearly rate and keep it current if you can. I think they actually charge a late fee on top of any prior year fees if you do let it lapse.
Yeah, I think it stacks up to like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
It's a little frustrating if that's the case, but yeah, like Darian said, just try to keep up with it and just keep it active is the easiest thing to do. And then, Darian, do you want to take this one?
Yeah.
And I think I can just give you control if you want to do that, and I'll continue sharing.
Ooh, no, I want to share my own screen.
That works too. I'll stop my share.
Perfect. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Beautiful. So next we're going to go over a breakdown of the ARE format and divisions. The majority of these images come directly from the ARE 5.0 guidelines. This is what they look like. It's the first thing you should read through when you start studying. If maybe you started studying in the past, but you let it drop and now you're trying to get back into it, this looks a little bit different than what you've seen before. The ARE guidelines used to be a separate document from the ARE 5.0 handbook. However, they did an update to the exams this summer, I believe, when they migrated their testing center from Prometrics to PSI. And since that time, the guidelines and the ARE 5.0 handbook, or what was the handbook, have been combined into one document. So this now includes sort of all your introduction, how to take the ARE, scheduling, testing accommodations, down through what we're going to look at, which is the breakdown of each division. So as we go through these slides and these images, know that they're coming directly from this ARE 5.0 guidelines, and you can visit this at any time on NCARB's website. So if this is your first time really diving into studying, we have 6 divisions. They're all varying lengths and with different content. We've got practice management, often called PCM, and throughout this process, we'll probably inevitably start referring to these by their adjectives rather than their full names. It's really just easier. So we have practice management, or PCM, project management, or PJM, programming and analysis, or PA, project planning and design, or PPD, project development and documentation, or PDD, and then construction and evaluation, which is CE. These designators roughly align with the phases of a project, with the exception of something like a practice management and project management. When we're looking at programming analysis, this is really kind of focused on topics that might happen during schematic design. When we go to project planning and design, these are all topics and things you might tackle during design development. Project development and documentation, PDD, these are all things that you're looking at when you're typically into the construction documents phase. And then construction evaluation are things you're looking at once you're into construction administration. If you are recording your AXP hours, that's roughly how you can start to record them for each of these designators. So here's the overview of each exam time. It's really helpful in that it tells you your total time testing will be 19 hours and 50 minutes, which is really kind of depressing. Probably don't look at that. So we're going to go on, and they're going to break it down a little bit further. We'll talk about this by each exam. But here's the overall breakdown. The number of sections for each division varies between 4 and 5. The number of objectives vary between 12 and 17. Jumping right into PCM. This is the first exam on the handbook's list. That doesn't mean you have to take this exam first. A lot of people have different strategies about which exams are best to tackle first or last. A lot of people do end up sort of starting with PCM, PJM, and C&E because they are the shortest exams and they all really relate back to the contracts. And then saving PPD and PDD, which are really big, massive exams compared to the rest of them, for last. Or some people just go right down and do it in order. It all depends on what works for you and what aligns with your study schedule and what you think your strengths are. There are some that are good to gang together. In general, I always recommend people gang PCM and PJM together because there's a lot of overlap between the content on those 2 exams. It does make sense to gang C&E in there with them. All of these exams really rely heavily on the contracts as a source material. Similarly, there's a whole lot of overlap between PPD and PDD. You'll get a little bit of overlap between PA and PPD, programming analysis and project planning and design, but it's not as much as the overlap between PPD and PDD. So let's roll back to practice management. So this division will test a candidate's ability to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare by applying competent delivery of professional architectural services, applying the laws and regulations of architectural practice, evaluating legal, ethical, and contractual standards in the performance of architectural tasks. You can see these 3 sections right here. When you're reading this chart, expected number of items is the number of questions you can expect the exam to include on this individual section. And this is the percentage of overall questions. you can really use this chart to help inform you as to how you want to start to study. Because here you can see that Section 2, Finance, Risk, and Development of Practice includes 29 to 35% of the target questions. This is where the bulk of your exam is most likely to be. So maybe you really want to focus more time drilling down on the Section 2 than something like Section 4, Practice Methodologies, which has a lower target percentage. Use this information to your advantage. In an ideal world, we're all studying for all of these equal as much as we can. But we're busy people, and it hardly ever happens that way. So use this to your advantage all you can. This is one of the shorter tests at 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's a total of 160 minutes to answer 65 questions. So an average of 2.46 minutes per question. Plus, you're going to need to leave extra time for the case studies. This exam has a slightly higher average time per question, and that's because this exam in particular is going to have a lot of equations. In my time at Black Spectacles, one of the things candidates reported most about this exam is, I struggled with time and I didn't expect so many math questions. So just know going right into it that you are going to have a lot of math on this exam, and time management is going to be really crucial to your strategy. Does anyone have any questions on PCM maybe before we go on? If you do have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any time. Cool. All right. The next one on the list is the PJM exam. This division will test a candidate's ability to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare by administering contract requirements and competent delivery of the project services, organizing a team to design and produce contract documents, coordinating team activities and project budget, communicating information to all constituents throughout the project delivery process, and developing a project schedule that defines tasks and milestones. This one's a little bit longer at 180 minutes to answer 75 questions. That's 2.4 minutes per question, so a little bit less time. You can see here that Section 3 contracts is going to be the bulk of your exam. I previously mentioned briefly how PCM, PJM, and CNE all really rely heavily on the contracts. PJM certainly focuses on the contracts the most. This is where you really need to make sure you're studying your B101, your A101, and your A201 in particular. And you're going to be really, really likely to see a contract as a reference in your case studies in this exam. Next one, programming analysis. This test focuses on evaluating qualitative and quantitative project requirements, analyzing environmental, social, and economical requirements of a project, and synthesizing project requirements based on gathered information. It's another 180 minutes to answer 75 questions. Again, 2.4 minutes per question. Make sure you're keeping your time in mind when you're tackling these questions and not getting hung up on something and spending your valuable time. This exam really has a more even distribution of the target percentage per each section. Something that really typifies this exam is it's going to throw some questions at you about how to site your building, or how maybe a bubble diagram can show a building's program. It might have you arranging different programmatic pieces. So you can expect to get some point and click questions on this, as well as drag into place questions. Brian's going to review those question types shortly in the next part of this workshop. But no, those are something you're really probably more likely to see on the PA exam maybe than any other of the divisions. Next up is PPD. So this is the first of the big long exams. You've got you've got 245 minutes to answer 100 questions. So that's 4 hours and 5 minutes long. It's a doozy. The PPD and PDD exams are huge, and their length might inform your testing strategy. You can probably tackle the PCM and PJM exams without using a break, but you might really need to plan for a break for the PPD and PDD tests in particular. We're also going to talk a little bit more about how breaks in the exam work and testing strategy in the coming slides. So keep that in mind for PPD. PDD, very similar. as I mentioned before, there's also a lot of overlap on these two. So PDD looks at evaluating project documentation for the constructability of the building and site, integrating technical knowledge and information to refine a design, integrating materials and building systems to meet the project requirements, and translating design decisions into appropriate construction documentation. This one, I really want you to pay attention to how unequal the target percentages are. The bulk of your exam is sections 1 and 2. Sections 3, 4, 5 all have a relatively lower amount of target percentage questions. Really focus your time onto integration of building systems and materials and construction documentation when you're studying for this exam. And last but not least, we have construction and evaluation. This exam is going to focus on delivering professional services during project construction or construction administration, translating construction documents and specifications to communicate and bring clarity to design intent, coordinating construction activities to meet design intent, and evaluating completed projects. We're back to a shorter exam, 180 minutes to answer 75 questions, back to that 2.4 minutes per question, which is consistent throughout all the exams with the exception of practice management. Here is one of the exams where you can expect to see maybe an odd construction detail, and it's asking you if there's anything wrong with it, or maybe they're showing you a picture of something that's under construction and they're asking you to evaluate something about it. You're also going to see things that relate back to the contracts and the architect's responsibilities during construction. All right. One of the last things I'm going to talk about before handing it back over to Brian is the breakdown of the AIA format in divisions. At the end of the AIA 5.0 guidelines is a really handy reference matrix. Because there is so much content to cover on these exams, a lot of you will likely choose to use some sort of study resource that aggregates information for each of these exams. That would be something like the what are the ballast books called now, Brian? Sorry, I can never remember it.
PPI.
Something like the PPI or Black Spectacles or Amber Book, or even some of the AIA's resources. However, if you want to go back to the source document that they are writing these questions based on, you can look at the reference matrix, or maybe you are using a larger study resource or a full study resource, but you're still having trouble with a specific topic. That's when you want to go back to your AIA 5.0 reference matrix to figure out if there's a resource that can help you dig into that specific topic you're struggling with. I would not recommend you try to read everything on this list because that is impossible. But later on, we are going to talk about what primary resources and what resources are available to you as maybe AIA members or just people who come and join our study sessions, as well as what we know is available at the local library. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but the little stars here indicate that it's more of a primary resource that they're pulling from, and these little colored boxes for each exam represent what exam this reference is used for. And it is multiple pages. When you get to the last page of the reference matrix, it specifically looks at contracts. This is another helpful one. Don't try to learn all the contracts. Really stick to the ones that they have listed here. In particular, the A101, the B101, and A201 are going to be your big three contract references on the exams. Towards the end of the guidebook or the guidelines, there's also a couple other helpful sections like common abbreviations. If you're someone who speaks English as a second language, this can be really helpful. I know when I was instructing at Black Spectacles, we had a lot of English second language attendees who weren't struggling with the content at all. It was just the way NCARB phrases things. So definitely check this out. More common abbreviations. It also includes the formulas that will be available while testing. This is good to know. These are always available for you to pull up during your exam and use. We also have structural resources, and typical beam nomenclature, which I will never remember. So I should maybe print this out for work. Okay, I have one last slide to go over. Breakdown of the ARE format and divisions, looking at your rolling clock. So your rolling clock is available on your record, and mine doesn't look like yours will because I'm done. But yours will have a little bar here that says how long you have left. You have 5 years to complete all divisions starting when you complete your first exam. Extensions can be applied for under extenuating circumstances. And be sure to look into what those circumstances are. Brian was telling me that having a kid is actually a circumstance that can update your rolling clock. And a lot of people struggle with testing because, you were in school for maybe 7, 8 years and you then get married and you want to have a kid because you've been in school for 8 years, you haven't had time to yet. That shouldn't prevent you from getting tested, from completing your testing. You can email NCARB and ask for that extension due to any sort of child having or sickness. And from what I understand, they're usually pretty good about it. Don't be afraid to reach out to them. They are pretty helpful if you can get a hold of someone. Don't call, email's better. If you call them, you will almost certainly be on hold, and that's no fun. Did you have anything to add about the rolling clock, Brian? I know you know more about that than I do.
Just that, so that specifically starts, when you pass your first exam, and it starts for that exam. So say if you pass PCM and then you pass a few others somewhere in that 5 year time, if you hit that 5 year mark, you don't just drop everything that you've done. PCM then falls off that 5 year list, and that 5 year mark then starts looking at the next test that you passed. And so you won't lose everything at the 5 year mark, but either way, you should do everything you can to try to get everything done within that window so that you don't lose progress and lose work that you've put in.
Definitely. Last thing, pass rates. Overall pass rates by school can be reviewed at NCARB's website. A little bit earlier, I posted a link to these slides, so you can visit that and take a look at your school if you want. People ask often, what do I need to actually pass? What's the passing percentage? There's no hard and fast answer. It ranges from 58% to 71% correct. And you can view this on NCARB's website. They update it every so often. And it varies based on exam. So for like PPD or PDD rather, in construction evaluation, it's 58 to 65, but you need a lot more to pass programming and analysis. The pass rates also fall into how NCARB is developing their cut scores. It's all very technical and kind of secretive, but they generally do try to push out an update if they're looking at these or reevaluating these. Just don't worry too much about it if you are, for instance, taking a practice exam and you're not scoring above, 64%. Well, guess what? 64% is passing for almost all the exams. Try to get as many right as you can, but don't get down on yourself if you still feel like you just are missing something. And when you're testing, don't worry if you feel like you're struggling. Just do your best. There's no sense in worrying about it. Just keep at it. And sometimes you'll be surprised, or sometimes you're testing and you failed, and that happens too. But that's okay. You just got to sign up for another one. Everyone fails an exam.
And a quick note on that, the reason why there's a bit of a range is that there's multiple forms of every exam, because they don't necessarily want you to take it at one point and then take it again, the 60 days later, and it's the same exact exam. So they have multiple forms that one may be a little bit more difficult than the other, and that's why they have that adjustment in the pass rate or the passing score.
Yeah, and that plays into this last point right here. There is a 60-day waiting period for retakes of division and a maximum of 3 attempts in a year. My advice to candidates is always, if you fail an exam, sign back up for it immediately, because you've already been studying. It's going to be easier to keep that momentum up if you can, but you know yourself better than I know you. If you need a break from it, don't be afraid to take it. If you can go right back into it after a failure, I think that can sometimes work out better because you're already in the mode. You're not sort of switching your subjects and confusing information. But know yourself and know your own testing strategy. Okay. Any questions before we move on to the different question types? All right, I will turn it back over to Brian. As soon as I find my Zoom bar to stop the share. I think if, oh, there it is.
Mine always ends up on the wrong screen.
Yeah, I think mine's spazzing out because I have 3 screens. Okay.
I think I can.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. Can you see mine fine?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to get into some of the questions now, and we're going to be looking for some participation from you guys for this. So first, I'll talk a little bit about the kinds of questions that NCARB talks about having on their exams. They refer to these with cognitive levels, which I was not familiar about this before that, but there are 4 different types. But NCARB says that they only use 2, which is the understand and apply and analyze and evaluate. And so the understand and apply types of questions, they require you to understand a concept and then apply it to a scenario. While the analyze and evaluate items will ask you to analyze a set of concepts or factors and then make an evaluative judgment with that evidence that is given to you. The other 2 cognitive levels are remember and create, and the NCARB makes a point to say that these are not included in their exams. There is a degree of remembering concepts that you'll need to know, or maybe like abbreviations that Darian pulled up earlier, but they don't require you to have hard and fast memorization of terms and things like that. So, as an example of an understand and apply question, we've got a residential development is composed of large building lots. On-site sewage disposal for each lot is permitted, subject to the suitability of the soil. What type of soil investigation should the architect request? And so again, with this UA item, you're required to understand the purpose of what they're asking for, understanding a scenario, and choose from the options that they give you. So does anyone have an idea on this question? If we can answer in the chat, or you can unmute if you'd like.
Hi, I think I just saw the question. I just took a couple of tests all in a row. I'm Lucas, by the way.
Mhm.
And I think it might be percolation test.
That is correct. Yeah, so in this case, it's requiring you to understand what the concept of a percolation test is and apply your understanding of that to this situation. And again, all these things are covered in various study resources. So we're just going to look understanding the types of questions that we're seeing today. So an example of an analyze and evaluate question, we've got a 100% DD cost estimate for a 2-story construction type 5B 3-unit townhouse is completed and comes back higher than expected. That's unusual. The client asked an architect to value engineer the structural design. What changes should the architect consider as they move forward with construction documentation? So we've got change from balloon frame to platform frame structural system, replace the wood stud shear walls with glue lam columns, or use a prefabricated floor element instead of a site assembled floor system. So what do we think would be the most cost-effective solution to move forward with this construction?
Ooh, Brian sent a message that says prefab floor.
I believe they call the answer out as actually balloon frame versus platform frame.
I was actually going to guess the glue laminated, the shear walls instead of glue lam columns, because glue lams are surprisingly expensive.
Well, I think you're reading it backwards, though. It's saying that they have stud shear walls and they're
Oh,
replacing with glue lamps. So I think second option there is going to be more expensive and isn't going to help you in that value engineering process. So definitely this is one of those cases where, all of these answers might have merit in some way. Except for that one that Darian picked because she read it
oh
wrong.
my God.
But I'm kidding.
But that's a good point though,
Yeah.
because the biggest challenge I have when testing is I tend to sometimes read past the words too quickly. Kind of like what I just did. So for me in particular, using this highlight and the strike through tools was really important on every single question, or I would do things like that.
Yeah, and we'll highlight that a little bit when we look at the demo exam. But so in this
Also,
case, you
why
really
would
need to
anyone pick balloon framing in the first place? It would have already been platform framed.
right.
Dumb question.
So this question is requiring you to take a look at the different options that you have and sort of evaluate the different conditions and try to come to the best solution. They'll often have multiple correct answers, but you have to choose the most correct answer. It can be a little frustrating. They might try to trick you a little bit from time to time, but you just need to kind of break down what your options is, and using some tools like highlight and strike through can help you there a bit. So there are, I believe, four different types of actual questions in terms of the format. So first, we've got our standard multiple choice question, where you're just going to select a single answer out of either 3 or 4 response options. So we just saw one with 3. This is one with 4. So the cross section shown indicates an interior column. The tributary area for loading the column equals 20 feet by 24 feet. Assuming no live load reductions, which one of the following is the design load for the footing? So I'm not going to ask us to whip out our calculators and figure this out right now. But this is an example that, even if it's multiple choice, you might still need to do a little bit of math. You can reference some of the reference formulas and such that you'll have available with you on the exam. But so in this case, the answer is 72,000 pounds, and we can, dig into details of those kind of calculations when we get into those focused exam sessions. But again, it's just selecting one choice and then you can move on. Similar to that, there are check all that apply type of questions. So it's very similar to the multiple choice, but typically they will ask you to, it will be in the instructions on the number of items that they're asking for you to pick, and it can be in a range of 4 to 6 possible options. And all of the correct options must be selected in order to get the item correct. There's no partial credit if you get 2 out of 3 right, sort of thing. So for this question, we've got 7 months after substantial completion for a new office building, a building owner contacts an architect to report that mold has been found in a basement utility room. It appears a mechanical exhaust fan has malfunctioned. In which of the following ways should the architect address the issue? Check the two that apply. So that's where it'll tell you how many that you need to check. We've got submit an additional service request to the owner, meet with the owner to review the building operations, advise the owner to file a claim for damages, advise the owner to notify the original contractor, advise the owner to hire a new contractor, or specify a new fan for the owner to purchase as a replacement. So, any thoughts on what are the 2 items the architect should suggest to address the issue?
So for these questions in particular, the check all that apply, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more later too, I think, but a good way to start with these questions is to remove the ones you know are obviously wrong. I think these can be some of the trickiest question types.
Mhm.
And remember, all these questions are weighted the same. You kind of have to game it. When you are making a guess, if I'm going to use just a standard multiple choice question because that's the only way I know how to do the odds in my head. I don't know how to do the odds in my head for select all that apply. But if you're looking at a multiple choice question, if you're guessing blindly, maybe you just flat out don't know it. You're guessing, randomly picking one. You have a 1 out of 4 or 25% chance of getting it right. However, if you can cross out at least one of the options, you're up to a 33% chance of getting it right. If you can cross out 2 options and only choose between the remaining 2, you have a 1 in 2 or 50% chance of getting it right. So try to use that in your favor. So for this one, let's go down it together and see if maybe there are at least a few you can cross out immediately before we guess. So the first one, submit an additional service request to the owner. So I think this one's ambiguous because you might be getting into some actions here, which would be an additional service. So maybe we don't feel confident we can eliminate that one. Meet with the owner to review building operations. That sounds like a reasonable option. Let's keep it. We're not going to cross it out. Next one, advise the owner file a claim for damages.
I
Maybe.
think you're like jumping straight into legal implications there. So yeah,
It
it's a
sounds
hard
like
maybe.
something that could happen, but like Brian said, that's kind of like going 0 to 100 very quickly. Maybe we feel like we can go ahead and use our crossout tool on that one. Awesome. Next one, advise the owner to notify the original contractor about that issue. That sounds like a really reasonable action. Maybe we should highlight that one because we think it might be correct, or maybe we feel strongly enough. We're just going to check that box now. The next one, advise the owner hire a new contractor to fix the fan. Well, if it's 7 months after substantial completion, it's still in warranty. I don't think we want to tell them to hire a new contractor. Let's cross that one out. Next, specify a new fan for the owner to purchase as a replacement.
Same note. I'd
yeah.
say, yeah, you're still within warranty. You shouldn't have to replace it
Yeah. So
with
let's
a
go.
new model.
Let's cross that one out too in our heads. Okay. So what we have left with is we're definitely advising the owner to notify the original contractor about the issue. And then we're maybe submitting an additional service request to the owner, or we're maybe going to meet with the owner to review the building operations. I think as a first step, meet with the owner to review the building operations is going to be our best bet. So let's check that one and review the answer.
Cool. And as Farnaz answered in the comments as well, the answers are the second and fourth one that we discussed were viable options.
Perfect. And then if we do have a couple questions in the chat, can you talk about your experience using the computer interface for test taking? Did you go to a test center in person or take it online and remote? From Brian as a direct message to me. We're going to talk about that in the next section. We'll really dig into that, don't worry. And then the next one, do you get points deducted for answering a question wrong on the exam? No.
No. Yeah, if you don't know it or you don't have time, say there's 10 questions left in your test and you have 60 seconds and that clock is making you nervous, answer those as fast as you can and just get something down. Like Darian said, if there's a chance, it's an answer. You will not lose points for getting an incorrect answer. You will only not gain points if it's incorrect. So, and as Darian mentioned earlier as well, every question on the test is worth the same amount of credit toward your score. So if there's a rather difficult question that requires some extensive math or reading into a resource, that's going to cost you just as much as a multiple choice question that will take you 20 seconds to read through and answer. It's about balancing your time there, about figuring out what's more valuable to take advantage of that time.
Definitely. I always tell people the worst thing you can do is run into a calculation question and spend 10 minutes trying to get it correct and still not feel like you have it correct. If you look at it and you say, oh, well, I have no idea how to do this, click an answer, mark it for review, maybe write a little note on your whiteboard about coming back to it if you have time, and move on. Don't get into a sunk cost fallacy type deal. Just know when you need to move on for time purposes, and get to the questions that you feel like you can answer.
Yeah, typically you can, mark it and come back to it later. There's some stipulations about that, depending on if you're taking a break or not, which we'll talk about, but usually you can come back to it if you have time at the end. On our next question type, we've got quantitative fill in the blank. And so this is the only one that doesn't have, an answer element or a checkbox to hit where you actually will need to type in a number. It will always be a number. They'll never ask you to spell out a term or anything like that. It will always be a number that you'll be filling these boxes in. So in the case of this question, it's asking, office leadership at an AE firm is performing an evaluation of the efficiency of their office and overall effectiveness of each employee. What is the utilization rate of architect A? So the resource that they're giving here in this question is essentially the hourly breakdown of this architect A, the projects that they're working on, and their role in that project. And so you can start to put these together, and it's broken down in average weekly hours. And typically with utilization rate, you can expect to compare that against a 40-hour work week, and comes out as a percentage. So, if 20 of your 40 billable hours, that means your utilization rate will be 50%, as a quick example there. So in the case of this question, we've got 20 hours as a project manager on one project, and then we got 7.5, 4.5, 4.5, 2.5, and 1. And so that all adds up. We can do that math real quick to get that 40. So he's got a full work week there. But then you need to start looking about what those tasks actually were, because typically that utilization rate is only going to be about billable hours, things that the firm is getting paid to do, and not necessarily overhead. So like continuing education, that would be overhead. Firm staffing of the office operations, I would say that would be overhead as well. There's one more item in here that does not qualify toward that utilization rate. Can anyone name which item that might be? All right.
I'll give you a hint. It has to do with business development.
We'll run through them a little bit, but the first one, project manager on a community center, it's likely to be billable hours there. Rehabilitation clinic, another project there as a project manager. And then apartments, drawing review and redlining, is typically included in the contract, and you would want to do that before submitting for a permit. Now, the responding to an RFP, request for proposal, that is typically before a contract is even formed and would not necessarily be considered billable hours. And so that's actually in some overhead time that firms will usually pack into their overhead to be able to win those projects and achieve that. So in that case, the answer actually comes out to 80% is what they're looking for here. And that would be because you would remove that 9 hours out of the 40. Or 10 hours out of 40, sorry.
No worries. And then just want to talk really quick about just a vocabulary item. Billable or billing means hours that are actually put onto a project that are then billed to the client. So if you ever hear someone talking about billable hours versus overhead, it's hours that can be charged to client versus hours that are related to the office and can't be charged to a client or an individual project. Also want to talk about rounding real quick because a lot of people get very concerned about the rounding. And it's another one of those things where don't worry about it. The worst thing you can do is worry about it while you're taking your test. If you are to round, that will be included in the question. It'll say round to the nearest hour. And typically the rounding is simple. It's going to be the nearest half, the nearest whole. It'll round down if it's 4.9 or 0.49 or below. It'll round up if it's 0.5 or over. It can get a little tricky once you get into some of the questions in PPD and PDD related to code, particularly when you're looking at counts and occupancies where you can't round down. You need to account for the greatest whole person and round up. Those are some specific nuances we'll dig into a little bit more once we get into the individual exams. But also know that especially when it comes to these quantitative fill in the blank type questions, NCARB is establishing a range of correct answers to account for slight variations in rounding. Let's say that when you were, this is an easy one because there's no decimals, but let's say that when you were calculating out a more complex question with some decimals in it, you rounded to the nearest hundredth each time you went to the next step. And you got an answer of 102.85 or something. However, someone else wasn't rounding at each step. They were using the full value saved in their calculator and they got 108.51 instead or something, just slightly 1/100th of a percentage off based on the rounding. Both of those answers can still flag as correct because NCARB establishes a small range of answers to account for slight variations. So again, the worst thing you can do is worry about it. Write your answer, do your best, and then move on and put it out of your mind.
Yeah, and these questions will always present you with the unit that they're expecting for your answer. So in this case, it's just a percent. Sorry, it's just a percent, but it might be square footage or pounds per square inch, something like that. It will always present you with that unit. All right, next question is the hotspot questions. These are more graphical questions. You're typically presented with an image, and what you don't see in the background of it is that there is an invisible box that is your allowable area to click in to give you a correct answer. And so, you'll hover over the image and you get a set of crosshairs that you essentially drop onto the image, and that is your answer. So in the case of this question, we've got during a construction observation visit to a new townhouse development, an architect reviews the contractor's installation of the roof sheathing. Click on the material in the photo that contributes to the required fire separation between adjacent townhouses. And so essentially we need to select an area in this image that describes that material that would be used for fire separation between adjacent townhouses. Does anyone have an idea on the area that I would click on this image? Some notes that you would take from this question. We're looking at, this is clearly wood construction, and we're looking for fire separation between what is residential units. So in this case, you're typically going to use fire rated conditions, and if you've ever seen fire rated wood, it is typically heavily chemically treated, and it will often give you a light red tint. And so in this case, we would say, along this area where you see this fire rated sheathing would be a correct answer. So if we look at this highlighted blue area, if you click anywhere in there, that is a correct answer. And it will never give you an acceptable scoring area that is ridiculously precise. They're usually pretty generous about the area that you can click in, and just being able to understand the question and where you need to drop those crosshairs.
Yeah. And then just tie into practice at all. If you ever see something called as FRT plywood or FRT blocking, that's fire resistant treated, right? FRT, fire resistance treated.
I think so.
um and that's what they're saying is it's been treated, so it now has a fire resistance and it can contribute to that fire separation. Oh,
Any
and
questions there?
Olivia joined us. Welcome, Olivia. Hi. Okay.
All right, so our last question type is drag in place. And so these are, again, questions that are typically accompanied by an image, but you'll also additionally get a bank of items adjacent to the question that you'll then pick up, drag, and drop into the appropriate areas on the question. And so in some cases, well, we'll look at this question and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. So in this specific situation, we're presented with a general site plan. And we say an architect is commissioned to design a painting studio in the southwest region of the United States. The client has provided the following information. So we've got daylight must be provided in all spaces. The office must receive direct morning sun. The open studio must have a panoramic view of the landscape with limited direct sunlight. The storage space must be directly accessible from both the office and the studio space. And the circulation main entry must have a view of Oak Street. Drag the spaces onto the proposed building footprint to fulfill all client requirements. So this is something that you would probably see in the PA, Programming and Analysis exam, where you're looking at general site concepts, and you've got solar orientation and positioning of details on the site. And so you would be presented with, these floor blocks that were described in the question, and you essentially drag and drop these and pick them up and place them into the proposed building footprint. And in some cases that you can start to see here, that footprint is actually kicked about 10 degrees, and it gives you, it's a little hard to see on this image. It would be more clear in the actual exam, but you'll see that it measures that actual angle here at 10 degrees. And so something that you can do with these word bank or these item bank questions is that you can actually right click on these items, and it will bring you up a small dialog that you can then enter in a rotational degree that it will actually shift that so you can place it in there appropriately. I think that was not as clear in the past. I kind of figured that out myself when I was testing, but they've made it much more clear now in the guidelines.
Yeah, I took 3 exams before I figured out you can rotate things.
Yeah.
It doesn't usually become an issue until you get to this programming and analysis.
Yeah.
Then you're like, well, how do I make this fit? You can rotate it.
Yeah. And then, so in this question specifically, we can run through it a little bit. We've got the open studio space, we got the circulation and main entry, the storage, and the office space. So we know that the daylight must be provided in all spaces. So I think generally that's just asking that every space is on an exterior wall of the building so we can give it some windows. The office must receive direct morning sun. So this is something to note with a site plan that north is actually to the left of this plan. This is not north facing up. So our morning sun would come in the east, which would actually be on the top side of this plan. So the office would probably want to be somewhere along this top wall of the building. And then, so the open studio space must have a panoramic view of the landscape with limited direct sunlight. So the limited direct sunlight there is a big note that we will likely want it in the on the north wall of the building. And so something to take note of there is it will usually give you a region to consider. In this case, the southwest region of the U.S. In the U.S., this is going to be pretty consistent with answering this question, so that's not a huge deal. But if this was, maybe in the southern hemisphere, it could be much different. Typically, you won't get questions like that, though, considering this is for US exams. The next portion is that the storage space must be directly accessible from both the office and open studio space. So that's a note about adjacency between these spaces. So this storage space just needs to share connection between the office and open studio spaces. And then the last note is that the circulation main entry must have a view of Oak Street, which we have noted here. So in that case, we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the answer that they have for us here, and we'll talk about it. We've got the open studio space taking most of this north wall. We've got the office getting the morning sunlight from the east. The storage is adjacent to both the office and the open studio space, and that circulation main entry has access to Oak. And then again, all 4 items are on exterior walls so they can get daylight. Any questions or notes there?
Ooh, I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you do if maybe you're overlapping slightly on some of your drag and drops? Like, what if you didn't get it perfectly in line?
Yeah, so this is another situation kind of like the hotspot question that we had last time. NCARB is not ever going to give you an extremely precise target to hit. If you've got a little bit of overlap, if you're not quite in between the lines, that's going to be all right. They have an area for you to be able to hit that is typically fairly generous. So you should be good. All right. Lucas said he got some questions wrong in a practice test because he didn't know how to rotate yet. It's a funny little thing that's wasn't well communicated for a while. So last but not least, we've got our case studies. So these are not necessarily, it's not necessarily different question type, it's a different organization of the questions. So these are going to be all of the same types of questions that we've already talked about, but you will have a collection of questions that are all related to the same reference material. And so in the case of what we're seeing here, we've got a scenario description, and at the bottom, you'll see the resources associated with that. And we've got all these tabs across the top of the question. And so you can click into each one of these and it will give you additional information. So it might be a site plan like what we just saw in the last question, programmatic elements, a geotechnical report, zoning ordinance, and code excerpts. There's a lot of supporting information here. And a note to this is that you need to be careful about managing your time and understanding how to navigate these resources efficiently. So it's going to give you a lot of information, but it could be a simple question like this. It could still be a one sentence question that you just plug a number in, but for this question, I would likely need to reference the the question is minimum number of off-street parking spaces required for the new event center. So there's a good chance that I'm going to have to reference the site plan to understand the site. I'm going to have to, and then likely understand the zoning ordinance to understand the local zoning requirements for parking. And then potentially the programmatic elements or this description to understand the size and the occupancy of the space to calculate that number. So again, it can be a pretty simple question, but you've got a lot of resources to back it. And we'll get into navigating those resources in a bit. These case studies can hit a range of topics, and depending on your exam, might have a bunch of different resources to reference. And so this is a chart that is shown in the guidelines that can talk about those kind of resources that you might find on the exams. So in your practice management exam, there's a good chance your case studies are going to reference the AIA contracts. And then you might get financial statements, example RFPs or resumes, while in a later exam like PDD, it might be a reference to the ADA to understand universal design, or architectural drawings, the site plans, and things like that. And in a lot of cases, while they're not going to give you the entire ICC code documentation, they will give you a select set of chapters and excerpts that you can navigate through. They will always have an adjudicated table of contents for those resources that they give you, so you understand what's actually there, and they're not going to throw the whole book at you. But then there's some tools to be able to navigate it as well.
And then a quick note about the IBC. They are currently on the 2018 IBC, right? I'm not confusing that. Yes.
I do believe.
They are currently on the 2018 version of the IBC, which is important to know because there might be some differences between the older versions. I think when I was testing, it was still on the 2015 IBC. The code does evolve, and you need to know that you're going to be answering questions based on the current one. This might also be different than your state's current adoption. So it's a good idea to look into the current code just briefly to peruse any sort of differences before you're testing, just to make sure that you're answering questions based on that.
I believe that is referenced in this reference matrix.
It is. I had to pull it open to
check. Yeah, so it's calling out the 2018 building code there, and then it will likely call out the ADA manual as well. Oh, there it is. The ICCA 117.1 2009 is the one to reference there. So, because I know specifically in some newer editions of that, your turning radius is larger. So you want to make sure you're referencing the right material. But
oh my God, it is.
Oh yeah, it's turning into 66 inches rather than 60. It's going to be a problem.
We'll never get that correct.
It's going to be a problem.
My bathrooms.
Yeah. All right. So going forward.
Wait. Can we go back 1 second? Just want to talk a little bit about strategizing for the case studies. And I'm going to use PJM as an example because it's what I'm most familiar with. But you're really likely to get a contract on this exam as a reference. So maybe when you're going through and you're doing the first part of the exam before you get the case studies, you come across a question and it's based on the B101, but you just can't remember what the answer is. What I would recommend is making a note of it in your whiteboard, write down the question number, the contract you need, maybe a super brief explanation of what it is, and then move on. Maybe take a guess to make sure you're marking all of these at least with something. But wait until you get to those case studies, and maybe you get that contract you need. And because you took the time to write it down on your whiteboard, you can easily navigate back to that question and put the answer in. Since you were able to have that reference, you can go back and respond to that question that hung you up on the B101 earlier. However, this is also going to tie into how you take your breaks. And I think it's worth, while we're talking about case studies, some people like to start with the case studies rather than starting at question 1. They go straight to the first question of the case study, so they know which references they have to work with right off the bat. And in that instance, maybe you're writing those references you have on your whiteboard, so you can always go back and reference which ones you have access to, really utilizing all of your resources to your advantage. If you do this, however, when you take a break, you cannot reopen any question you've seen. So if you maybe started with your case studies, went through all of them, then you took a break. When you get back, you can't reopen the case studies to use those references. So if you are going to start with the case studies, make sure you leave at least one unread if you plan on taking a break. If you're not going to take a break the whole time you're testing, this isn't an issue. But the break policy has thrown a wrench in a lot of people's testing strategy. So make sure you're aware of that going in. What I tell people is don't take a break if you can, but if you are someone who needs to take a break, especially for those 4-hour-long tests, completely reasonable that you would need a break. Make sure you have a plan for when you're going to take it and how. so you can really maximize those references you might see, and all the tools available to you. Okay, sorry, Brian, I'll let you move forward now.
No, that's good notes. A couple quick things about the case studies. They can be anywhere from 10 to 20 question sets that are related to that materials, and there's always 2 case studies per exam, typically meant to be a snapshot of a real world scenario that you might encounter. I think that was all with those, and we'll start looking a little bit more at the actual software that you'll be working with, the scheduling, and the testing centers. So there's a range of features included in the actual demonstration exams and the actual exams. And so if you are not familiar, NCARB offers a demonstration exam for free it's a very general exam. It might hit on topics from every division. And I highly suggest using this to familiarize yourself with the software to understand how to use it a bit better. Now, granted, there are the actual focused practice exams per division that I would use that as your actual studying resource. This demo exam that they have on their webpage, I would use as more of familiarizing yourself with the software. So we can get into that. We'll run through each of these items in the software, and we'll go through any questions that we have here. So when you first open it, this is an example of what you're going to see when you first sit down at the testing center. And you're going to have to go through some of these introduction walls of text. Typically, there are disclaimers saying, don't share any information that you found here outside of this testing center. Don't communicate these things. Conduct yourself professionally, civilly, honestly, and such. You have to agree to all this.
Quick note, they
yeah.
will reprimand you if they find out that you've been sharing testing materials. I think a couple years ago, there was a whole group of people in New York who can no longer ever get licensed because they were sharing materials on exams that they encountered with each other.
They take these disclaimers very seriously.
Yeah, and so like as an instructor with Black Spectacles, we were coached on you can always talk publicly about general concepts you see on the exam. You cannot talk publicly about specific individual questions you've seen. So just be aware of that and be careful with what you post online, because NCARB does have people who look at those chat boards and make sure that people aren't sharing literal questions they saw in the exam.
So in this beginning area, the time that you're in these sort of introductory things, or it'll have some pre-test questions to just confirm that you know how to use the software. Perchance it will not actually start your clock until you get to this screen, which this is your exam summary screen that has all the questions that are involved. So we've got the 2 case studies at the bottom here, and then we've got 61 standard questions. And so this is your general dashboard of all of your questions that you can see. You've got return to exam will take you to the last question that you were at. You can review marked, which will jump just between the marked questions. You can mark your questions from here, or review which questions that you have marked from here. And you can review all unanswered. You could also take your break from this. We'll come back to taking a break. So let's start. We'll just jump into the first question, see what we get. Every time we open this, it's going to be a different question to start. So, but in something like this, we can start to look at some of the tools that they offer you for this. So, we jumped into a good one that likely requires the calculator and potentially some references. So, start from the back end. I'll look at the references that you have here. And so these are what was referenced in the guidelines that don't seem to be all loading for me properly right now. But these were referenced in the guidelines about what is available. So you can look at this ahead of time if you need to. But these are generally just going to give you those abbreviations, some basic formulas to work with. And the structural one has some simple beam diagrams that you can reference as well. So you don't necessarily have to memorize any of this, but be familiar with the concepts. So like plumbing, HVAC. There's just quick conversion stuff with some of these things. Acoustics, electrical. These are typically one-page documents. The structure is a bit longer, and with that, you can get into some of the navigation that they allow you. So there'll be a sidebar that you can jump between pages a bit faster. You can see that as a text breakdown or an image thumbnail breakdown. And then you can also search in here. So you can say, if you search for moment, so it's going to grab any text item in here that you can shift through the document a bit faster if you're looking for a specific topic. This is particularly helpful if you got, a large code excerpt and you're looking for a very specific item in that. And even if you aren't immediately familiar with the code and where to go, you might have an idea of a keyword that you're looking for, that this will help save you a lot of time navigating that. So again, with this question, you might take a formula out of those references, and you've got a general calculator here that they will not give you a physical calculator in the testing center. This is what you have to work with for any calculations that you need to do. So there's a range of things. I just made it way too complicated than anything you'll ever see. But so you've got a basic scientific calculator. It does have some memory backup if you need to go back to a previous question. And so that's pretty straightforward.
I have a
Go ahead.
question.
Yeah.
Can you copy in between the calculator and your whiteboard?
That's a good question. Let's figure that out. So we've got now we've got our whiteboard open as well. So again, they no longer offer scratch paper that you can have physical in person. This is what you use to document. And so with this, you can do multiple pages. So, this might be, make this, question 1. And then this one's, your question 2. And you can always come back to these. And so in this case, let's say, see if I can't copy paste here. It is not letting me select that at all.
You can actually. I got it to work. If you highlight it from the front to the back and keep it held down and then hit Control-C, it actually does copy.
Okay. That was
So you have to make sure your text tool is selected too first.
Yeah. So that does work to a degree if you do need to copy an answer to come back to later, or list a set of calculations that you might have on a question. So generally in this whiteboard, though, think of it like Microsoft Paint. You've got pretty generic tools that you can work with, but you can do straight lines. It'll give you a quick angle calculation to go with that. I don't think there is. If you hold Shift, it'll give you some orthogonal snaps. You can do arrows, lines, two-sided arrow, some basic shapes that you can then. I think if there's a select tool, you can change the border type. You can change the fill color. Again, basic tools that you can use.
It's not Bluebeam though. You can't scale anything.
Right.
It was actually easier probably to scale things manually on the scratch paper than it is to try to scale them in this tool.
Sure.
So keep that in mind. And there's no guarantee unless they give you a scale on the exam that anything is going to be exactly to scale. So try to avoid eyeballing it if you can, as much as you can, and rely on your whiteboard for diagramming and scratching notes.
Yeah, and there's never going to be anything that strictly requires that you draw something out on the whiteboard. It is simply there for you as a resource to help organize your thoughts and diagram something out if you need it. And these pages are there as long as you need them. You can zoom in or out if you feel like you need more space after you already drew something in there. Say if it starts to get cluttered up here, you can delete a canvas, but generally if you have something there, it continues to be there. So I can go back to that later and back to what I had before, and it will all stay there unless you specifically delete that canvas.
And you can even rename your pages. So maybe you name one reference, and that's where you keep a list of the references you saw in your case studies, or maybe that's just where you're listing questions that you think you can answer if you have time to go back to them.
And I did that by right-clicking on that tab at the top, and then it gave me this rename option.
NCARB has faced a lot of pushback on the whiteboard material. If you ever go to the AIA 5.0 community, which is NCARB's own community forum board, you can see a lot of people commiserating about their struggles with the whiteboard. There is also linked on NCARB's website or on NCARB's YouTube some instructional videos they produced about the whiteboard and whiteboard functionality. So it's probably easier and quicker to play around with it yourself and to talk to other people who have tested about how they use the whiteboard. But if you do want to hear it directly from the source, NCARB has quite a few articles as well as YouTube videos on the interface and how to use the whiteboard. We'll talk a little bit about proctoring options later after this, but the whiteboard was introduced to even the playing field between those who are testing in the center and the online proctoring option. This update took place at the beginning of 2021. Or maybe it was actually mid 2020. It was very much during the pandemic, and they really pushed to get this online proctoring option out for people who don't have easy access to testing centers or people who didn't feel comfortable going to them. But whether you are testing in person or online, you will have to use the whiteboard. And there are no testing accommodations that you can apply for that will give you back your pencil and paper. The whiteboard is what you have to work with, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm. So looking at some of these, like we said before, maybe you're encountering a question that just at first glance, it feels like a lot. It's going to take you a lot of time. Maybe you're not familiar with this concept, and you're like, you're feeling crunched for time. So let's go ahead. We'll mark this one for review, so that we know to come back to this, and we'll move on to the next question. And so this is a basic multiple choice question. We need to select one answer. And so, as Darian mentioned earlier, you might be able to go through some of these and be able to say, I think I'm fairly confident that this might be the potential answer. Or you can say, highlight this one and say, that's definitely not an option. I'm going to go ahead and put a strike through that. And so this helps you to organize your thoughts a little bit better as you're going through some of these items. And again, that was just, you highlight the item, put a strike through. You can even do it in the question yourself, because sometimes these questions might be, multiple sentences that give a range of information. Some of that information might be completely irrelevant to the question, or might be there designed to throw you off a bit. So you can start to look at, let's see, IBC requirements for ventilation of attics, concealed roof spaces. Maybe for whatever reason, that might be a red herring, and you actually want to focus on the ventilation of the attics.
Ooh, and sorry, I've gotten trouble for this before. A red herring is like a false lead.
Yes,
in case you weren't someone who went to middle school in the US, because I used to say this during workshops all the time, and then someone was like, I don't know what a red herring is. And I was like, why would you? That's such a specific,
Sorry, yeah, it's just a
colloquial
phrase. Basically, it's just something that is designed to fool you. And it's just kind of in the way. You kind of need to just get that out of your mind. It might be confusing you if it's complicated in the way there. So use those tools as you need to help understand the question a bit better. And let's see some other things on here. We've mentioned a couple times about taking a break and what that means. And so we've got a number of questions that we might go through here. And then you've always got this break button up in the top right corner. And so say in this case, I'll go ahead and click that button. It's going to take me back to this exam summary screen. I didn't actually answer any of these questions yet. I didn't actually place any answers down for that. So it's telling me that those are incomplete. It has that first question as marked, and these other ones are marked as unseen. And so I'll click take a break again, and it's warning me that I have 30 minutes remaining. All of my previously viewed questions, completed and incomplete, will be locked when you return from that break. And so it's asking you to confirm that you want to take that break, and it's going to, hide everything that you've been looking at, and starts that 30-minute timer down here. Again, each exam division has a different amount of break time that you're allowed to take, and you can take this however you like. You can take 6 5-minute breaks if you like, or you can take one long 30-minute break. That is entirely up to you. If for whatever reason this timer runs out, it will automatically return you to the test and restart your test timer. And so you're not necessarily going to get kicked out or anything, but it will start eating your time that you have. So once you're done with your break, say return to test, and you'll now see that these first 4 questions that we looked at are now locked. I can no longer access those questions. And so you need to plan around that if you're taking a break, like Darian said. Let's go ahead and look at one of these case study items. There will be this whole range of resources that they provide you. And if you think, the IBC excerpts might be an important one that could be a good resource for some other questions in the test. And so maybe you make a point that you don't look at question 7 of this case study if you do it early, and you keep this as an available resource for after your break. If you want to split up your exam into 2 parts, then you can, look at means of egress issues and things like that. So one good thing to note here that you might have noticed when I hovered over this, they do hyperlink some of these sections in their titles, which is helpful to navigate on occasion. But again, you also have the different navigation tools on the side and the search and things like that. So these are those resources that we've been talking about, and they can be valuable on more than just the case study question in some cases.
And then some of the tools available to you, Brian talked about the hyperlinks, which are awesome. I don't actually think it had hyperlinks when I tested.
I don't think it did either. I think even this nicely organized chapter buttons over here are new, I think, as well.
I feel kind of gypped personally, but you can also search through this. Control F doesn't pull it up, I don't think. I think you have to physically hit.
Right. I think it's this little magnifying glass over here, and you can say whole words, match case, highlight all. So there's different functionality to that search item. But so yeah, if I wanted to get to, chapter 10, if they didn't have that immediately. So this is actually, I'm still in chapter 5, but it's a reference to chapter 10. So that might not be the most useful keyword that I could have used, but that's just an example. It will search the entire document. And in this case, I have 9 matches to that.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into this a lot when we go into the individual exams, but your ability to search through this information quickly is going to be a huge part of your strategy for tackling these case studies. You don't want to spend too much time searching through this information. So you don't have to have every single word of the contracts memorized to get the answer correct or to find a correct answer in a contract. But if you at least know each individual article of the contracts and what might be contained generally where in the contracts, that's going to make your life so much easier and your ability to search through this quickly to get your answer a lot higher. So as we go through this, we're going to focus on different ways that you can strategize how you're searching and how you can best use these references. And then we had a question from Brian in the chat. She said, can you repeat the break problem strategy for each case studies, and then, or will this be available to view later? Yeah, we are going to upload this to YouTube as soon as we figure out the best way to edit it and upload it to YouTube. So just quickly, we'll go over it briefly. Anything you view before your break will be marked as seen or responded. What was the exact number? Incomplete or
incomplete, or I'll this is one of those drag and drop ones that and you don't necessarily have to use everything in the word bank. If for some reason this doesn't want loading and staging, so I'll go that would have been an answer for that one. So that is marked incomplete, completed, and I just technically looked at the next question, so that one's marked as incomplete as well.
And then
And-
can you take the break to show how you'll be locked out of that one?
Yeah, so now my time is now down to 29 minutes. I'll hit yes. It will take me to this screen with my running break clock here, and you'll see my total test clock is paused. And once I return to the test, we'll refresh, and you'll see that those questions are now locked. And now, as far as the strategy to help with that on the case studies, it would be, I technically haven't looked at these questions yet. So I can go into this after my break, and I still have access to all of these resources that may be valuable in other questions. So I'm hoping that answers your question, Brianne. Another note about these case studies is that generally before you jump straight to the bottom and understand what they're asking, generally I would suggest skimming through the resources that they give you at a high level to understand this scenario. So that might be, I would say read through this portion in detail, skim through, the site plan. This might be project document. It might be a 12-page set of project documents, construction documents, whatever. Flip through it just to understand what you have available to you. This looks like a description of program elements. And I wouldn't spend too much time going through these to start, but just understand what you have available to you, and then move on to your questions and understand what it's asking, and think about what you might be able to jump back to help you answer that question. I think we're generally good on the demo exam here. We've got about 20 minutes that we can kind of get back to a few more things to wrap up. Does anyone have any questions on the software and demonstration exam and things like that before we move on? You can access that through NCARB's website and practice with it however many times you like. All right, moving on a little bit to actually scheduling those exams and getting yourself set up. So the exams are $235 per division. So that equates to $1,410 total for all 6 of those if you are able to pass them all in one go. Each additional try will cost you an additional $235. Depending on your situation, some firms may be able to help you out with that, may cover, a single attempt at each division, or reimburse you after you're licensed, things like that. So I absolutely discuss that with any firm or co-op that you're working with, and see if they're able to help you at all with that. Additionally, there's local and national scholarships through AIA or the Architects Foundation and things like that. We can absolutely help refer you to those items if you would like to look closer at that. When you're scheduling these exams, absolutely plan ahead. There's limited space in these testing centers, or limited number of people that can proctor the online exams. And so I would typically suggest scheduling a few weeks out, if not at least a month. Sometimes in busy seasons, it can be even longer than that. Sorry, I lost lights. I know there's some other professions that also require licensing exams that get very busy in different seasons of the year that you might be competing with, because these are shared testing spaces. They're not just for NCARB. And then it's first come, first served basis when you're scheduling that. And some of these exams, particularly at least when I was testing, the testing centers are typically split into a morning block and an afternoon block. For the shorter exams that we have, they fit nicely into those blocks. But for the longer exams like PDD and PPD, because the total testing window is greater than like 5 hours, they actually hit both of those blocks. So those ones are actually more difficult to schedule because you are technically taking 2 blocks and a full day of a seat in that testing center. So definitely plan ahead for these things. If something does come up and you need to reschedule, you can reschedule without charge up to 48 hours in advance for an in-person appointment, or 24 hours for an online proctored appointment. And you can always cancel up to an hour before the appointment, but canceling does carry a $100 fee with that. Scholarships, as I mentioned, available through Architects Foundation and some other resources that we can talk about if you're interested. The testing is done through a company called PSI. And again, as Darian mentioned, this is new as of mid-2020, I believe. There was a big transition, and so they were working
it
through.
was later.
It was.
It transitioned to Prometrics, it was Prometrics, which included the online option, and the PSI
Right.
transition just happened in 2022. And they
Okay.
are honestly still working out some kinks with it.
Yes.
For instance, there was recently an issue where the references and the case studies weren't loading for candidates at all.
I saw some notes about that very recently, yes.
Yeah, if you do run into any issues either at the testing center or remote proctoring, please, please, please be sure to report them to NCARB. Otherwise, they will assume everything's fine. And there are some instances where they will provide you with a refund if you experience a technical issue. But if you don't report it and let them know, there's no way they're going to give you any of your money back.
Correct. And you can also talk to us as well, and we can direct a message to NCARB as well to try to get to the bottom of things, and we might be able to notice trends. If you're having issues, it's one thing, but if we notice half the people in the city that are testing are having issues, maybe there's a bigger thing that's going on that we can try to get to the bottom of. Two major ways to test. There's in person, going to the testing centers that we've referenced, and when you schedule the test through your NCARB dashboard, you'll be able to see the different locations and times that are available. They'll give you a range of different places you can go to. You can set in a mileage radius of how far you're willing to travel to make sure that you get the time that you want and be able to pick through there. Typically, appointments are available, I believe, 7 days a week. Maybe not on Sundays, or are they? I can't recall currently, actually, but log in, register for that, and take a look at what's available and what works for your schedule. Typically, I know employers will be very lenient with that. If you need to take a morning off to take an exam or something like that, you should be fine. Typically, it will feel like going through TSA security when you are in these testing centers. There's ID requirements that you'll want to review in the NCARB guidelines, and you'll go through security screening where you need to empty all your pockets, put your stuff in a locker. If you wear glasses, they will inspect your glasses to make sure you don't have any testing material necessarily like written on your lens or hidden between folds in your clothes or pockets and things like that. They'll have you turn your pockets out.
For any ladies, they will make you take off large pieces of jewelry and put it in the locker. So if you have anything sentimental, maybe you want to leave that at home or just be prepared to have to take it off and put it in your locker. I think I had a pendant once and they said it was big enough to have materials.
I think they'll pretty much only allow you to keep, like wedding rings and things with strict like religious connotation, but typically remove all your jewelry if possible. Now the other option is remote proctoring, and so this one is fairly new, and they are still working out some of the kinks. Typically, we would recommend doing in person if you are able, but this is certainly an option. So if this applies to you and you are interested in remote proctoring, there's a number of steps that you'll want to take. So first off, there's an option to schedule a test run. That is highly recommended. They will pair you with a remote proctor before your appointment. This might be like a week in advance kind of thing, and just to help you set up your space and make sure you're compliant with their rules and that you're ready to test. You don't want that to be a last minute thing that you find out that something's wrong and you're not actually qualified to test, and they will not refund you if that's the case. You have to have an external webcam, and NCARB does offer a $50 rebate if you need to buy one of those. And so with that, one of the reasons to that, if you have a laptop that has a built-in webcam, that does not qualify. You need to buy an external webcam that you can essentially pick up, turn around and scan your whole room so the person that is with you proctoring the exam can observe the entire space and not just the front view of your laptop. Some other setup requirements there. Everything is done through a browser, a secure browser window, so you don't have to necessarily install any invasive software or anything on your personal device, but you potentially will need to have administrative permissions to be able to change settings so that they can monitor what's happening on your system. You can only use a single monitor. If you use a laptop and in a case that you have a larger additional monitor that you'd like to plug into, you will also then need an external mouse and keyboard so that you can shut your laptop and have everything on the single monitor. In no cases are you allowed to have two screens or more. Cannot have any headphones, whether they can't even be like dumb analog, just noise canceling construction headphones. Nothing. Can't have anything like that. Definitely ensure you have a stable internet connection. Hard line wired with Ethernet cable if possible, in case you have unstable Wi-Fi. Because if you have an internet issue and you get kicked out of the exam in the middle of it, you're done. You are not able to get back in, and they will not refund you for that.
Yeah, and no matter how good you think your Wi-Fi is, still plug in anyway. It's not worth the hassle of potentially getting kicked out of the exam because of reflip. Always use the Ethernet cable if you're doing the online proctoring.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as the space that you're studying in, or that you're testing in, you want to make sure it's an indoor, private, quiet, and uncluttered workspace. When they're scanning your room, if you have piles of books and papers off to one side, that's not going to fly. They're going to make you remove that from the room in some way or put it away. You can't have things laying around on your desk. I absolutely could not be testing in the space that I'm in right now. There's too many things going on. There's tons of clutter, rolls of paper, screens all over. Even if you have, say, a TV in your office on the wall, they will actually request that you take something like a bed sheet and cover up that screen. They don't want any chances that you're able to look at any reference material. And then if you're sharing a space, whether you're in an apartment or a house, have a spouse, a kid, even a pet, you need to do everything you can to make sure they do not come into your space and interrupt you during testing. Even if it's just your cat walking across your desk, they will flag you for that, and you will likely end your appointment. You can still take breaks for these, but when you come back from that break, again, you won't be able to access questions that you've seen, but you'll also have to go through a security procedure to get readmitted to allow you to test again, that they'll want to scan the room again and go through the whole process. So as we said before, we suggest doing things in person. While it may be a little harder to get to a testing center, it ultimately alleviates a lot of issues that people have been having with online proctoring, but it is an option for those that need it. In addition to that, I know Farnaz, you asked a question earlier. There are accommodations that you can apply for ADA or ESL, English Second Language accommodations that might allow you to have a private testing space, additional time to test, and things like that. Naturally, not all of these accommodations are supported in the remote proctoring option, depending on the situation. But I believe if you look at the guidelines, there is a particular section dedicated to this with testing accommodations that you're welcome to read through this. It might be, if you're pregnant or nursing, you can request additional space or time up to 50% longer, additional time for ESL up to 20% longer. You can have a dictionary with you, There's some limitations depending on jurisdiction, but ADA accommodations. So I highly suggest reading through some of this if you're interested in some of those accommodations. This is another note when you're going through security. These are all the things that you are pre-approved to have, but otherwise, if it's not on the list, there's a good chance you're not allowed to take it into the testing center. So all that information's there if you need to take a closer look at that. Before we move on and finish things out, you got any other notes there, Darian?
Only that I'm not quite, to be honest, I'm not quite sure if it's changed with the PSI migration, but applying for the testing accommodations has not historically been a very difficult process. I just pasted a couple links in the chat to NCARB's pages on ESL and ADA accommodations, as well as the application for ADA accommodations. It's 2 pages long. And it's really short. All you really need, I think, is a licensed professional's name, like a doctor's name, just to sign off that, yes, this is something that I need. If you have like ADHD issues, it's really simple to apply to have either a separate room or some additional time. They try to make it easy, and they've done a pretty good job recently of pushing to make the accommodations easy, including the launch of the ESL accommodations, which is a fairly new thing. There's also some really great ESL specific webinars. I think NCARB has done one, and then Black Spectacles has done one too on YouTube, if that's something that's helpful. And I'll paste those links in the chat as well.
Cool. Darren, do you want to take the screen back over to go through some of our resources that we offer?
Yeah. All right, kick you off and share my screen. And that puts my little bar up there. Perfect. Okay. So we've done a lot of effort into categorizing what materials people have used for studying, as well as how people have used them and how helpful they found them. Brian in particular went through and actually sorted out all the large amount of things that were in the actual AIA library at the AIA's office. If you don't know, the AIA office has recently moved to Race Street. And any of Julie's emails, it's the address is down there. And you can physically come here and look at any of the materials we have in our resource library, as well as apply to check one out. We also have some online reference materials available. Right now, we're really nailing down how the checkout process is going to work for those. So if you're interested, feel free to send us an email and we'll get back to you about how you can get access to some of these. And Brian, could you copy this and paste it in the chat?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. Go back. We spent a long time figuring out what references are on the exam and categorizing if the AIA Cincinnati library has them or if the public library has them, and distilling down some key takeaways people had about using those items to study. So Brian's going to post this in the chat, and we're going to work on getting this hosted on the AIA Cincinnati's EP page. But this lists the category of each material, how useful or important people found it for study, the resource name, the exams it's used for. This really interfaces with the ARE 5.0 reference matrix included in the ARE 5.0 guidelines, as well as a link to where you can purchase it if you want to, a description of it, the cost to purchase it, if it's available, and then those takeaways again. So this hopefully is a resource you guys will find useful. This first tab talks about all the resources that are in libraries. There's a second tab here called third-party resources, and these are some of the sort of full service study content providers that you might choose to pay for, or maybe your firm pays for. So things like Black Spectacles, Hyperfine, Designer Hacks, Pluralsight, and Amber Book, and some free tools like Arc Toolbox. All the links are here, the description. the cost, what you get if you pay for it, and also if they have any free tools available. So definitely check this out. Since this is an AIA sponsored study session, we should probably mention that they have launched their own study tools as well. Those are available on the AIA's website. You have to pay a fee for those. And I don't have any firsthand reviews of people who have used them yet, but they are AIA sponsored, so hopefully they are good. I trust that they are. Okay. Perfect. Does anyone have any questions about ARE study materials or third-party resources?
And I will note that these are directly out of that reference matrix that you can find in the guidelines.
Mm-hmm. There are some that aren't. So items not listed in the guidelines, I put 2 asterisks next to. So things like the old ballast review manual and PPI aren't literally references, but they are good resources that are available. Yeah, and pretty much everything else is listed as a reference. And if you do think of any questions afterwards, or if you have any feedback, maybe especially down on this list, there's some that I don't have any takeaways for because we didn't talk to anyone who personally used them. If you have a takeaway you'd like to contribute, we would really appreciate it if you'd reach out to us and let us know how you used it and what you thought of it. Okay. So again, if you find anything on this list that you want to check out from the AIA Cincinnati's resource library, send us an email and we'll get you the information on it. The Cincinnati Public Library, all you need is a library card. It might be something we might want to check into in the future is Kentucky Public Libraries too, I suppose, since we are in that catchment area.
Yeah.
But for now, it's contained to the Cincinnati Public Library. And more study sessions to come. So we've referenced this a couple times. We're going to do these monthly. This was our general overview. Thank you so much for everyone who joined. Next month, we are going to look at the PCM exam. The month after that, we'll look at PJM, then PA, then PPD, then PDD, then CNE. And then we'll sort of open it up to any other topics people want to discuss. Next month's practice management exam will be hosted by Brian, as well as John Edwards, one of the other early professionals group members who's been helping with this ARE resource library effort. And do you have anything else to add, Brian?
Does that, beyond these sessions, feel free to contact us anytime. If you've got questions about how to tackle something, if you're having an issue, if you just want to review a couple questions or things like that, feel free to contact us and we're happy to talk you through some things with you. Yeah,
we're here to help. And we also are the chair and co-chair of the AIA Early Professionals Committee. If you're interested in getting involved and aren't currently a member, feel free to send us an email and we will get you hooked up to some email lists. They love to send out email lists. And if you are already an AIA member, feel free to send me your email and I'll get you added to the member click so you can stay up to date on the most current happenings. We meet the second Monday of each month at 11 a.m. And you're welcome to join the committee. I think joining a committee isn't a super formal thing. You just start showing up to stuff and then we start calling you a committee member. So.
Any thoughts? All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Again, let us know if you have any questions going forward and good luck studying, good luck testing, and we'll help you get through it.
Yeah. Go Bengals. Bye.
Have a good Saturday, everyone.